Good morning. I felt like I was back in college in my speaking class because I was notorious for writing it as I was walking up to deliver it. And I thought of a point that I'd wanted to make and I hadn't written down anywhere, and I wrote it down. It's right before I came up here. So, um, good morning. It's great to see everybody here this morning. I'm really excited about my topic that I'm going to talk to you about in just a second, but I wanted to give a shout out to a lot of the men that have been getting up here speaking recently. All last week, I thought about Craig's words about that I'm a Clydesdale, and it really resonated to me, that we don't have to be great at everything, but you have to try. And Jordan has had a lot of great lessons about heroes of faith. And in some cases, they were kind of obscure, at least to me, characters, but he's opened up whole areas of the Bible that I can go back and study. And Wayne, his class, his Acts class, and his studying about David, just I've benefited greatly from the sermons that I've heard recently. And I appreciate all the effort that everybody's done. And I just hope I don't break the string today. That was my goal. But as my topic this morning is one of my favorite characteristics, and it's on loyalty. And what you're going to see, what the 4 points I want to bring out is, what does loyalty look like? What does it look like to us? But more importantly, are there biblical examples of loyalty? And that's a hypothetical question, obviously, both positive and negative examples. And is God loyal to us? Once again, we're going to look into that just a little bit. And then finally, the loyalty that God expects from us. So these are the main points that I want to talk about today. And girls, I told you one thing we're going to talk about, and it's coming up here in just a second. But a definition of loyalty is it involves faithfulness, devotion, commitment, and dedication to a person, idea, or cause. Betrayal, on the other hand, is the act of breaking trust or faithfulness. It is the opposite of loyalty. So, as we go through loyalty and as you think about what it is, these are the attributes that come up time and time again. Loyalty is kind of relational. It involves a relationship that you have, and we'll see with what as we go through here, but it involves faithfulness, and it involves devotion and commitment and dedication, all those things. My first example is I'm titling it Man's Best Friend. And this is what triggered my whole sermon, was a couple stories that I'm going to share with you at the beginning. And then trust me, we are going to get into a lot of scriptures in a minute. But on August 19th of last year, Rich Moore, as a man, he lived in Colorado, and he took his Jack Russell Terrier with him, and they went up in the mountains hiking. And if you know anything about Jack Russells, they're little bitty dogs, but they have high energy and they're very loyal, and nothing dissuades them. And Rich had some sort of accident or some health issue, and he wound up passing away. But they could not find either him or his dog for 10 weeks. And October 30th, a search party actually went out to an area they hadn't been before, and they actually found Rich's body, and his dog was still right there next to him. And his dog had lost 35% of his body weight, and he was in really bad shape, but he would not leave Rich. And to me, that is just a microcosm of, if you think about loyalty, you think of man's best friend, but you think about this dog. And to me, when I think of loyalty, that's what I think about. You couldn't have pulled him away from that environment for all the money in the world. And they say he lived off of rainwater that came and the few little mice or whatever that he could find, but he stayed right there. So as I go through talking about loyalty, this is the high water mark what we're going to be looking at. The rescuers that found him said that it was a magnificent story of survival. Not for Rich, but for Penny. My next one, I'm calling it Man's Best Friend 2. I've got a couple that we're going to talk about. But in Arizona, a man went out, Donald Hayes, he went up into the mountains with his dog. They went hiking for the day, and he got disoriented and lost. And he actually called and said he needed help. And before the rescuers could get to him, he got tired of waiting and he tried to find his way out himself and wound up going deeper into the woods and succumbed to the heat and the elements. But when they found him 6 or 7 days later, his dog was still laying right next to him. And then that's a picture of his dog. And his dog was in really bad shape because he was exposed to the heat and everything as well. But he would not leave Donald's side. Just yet again, another example of loyalty and what that can look like. And then finally, this might be my favorite example. There was a dog named Casper, and they showed videos of this dog, and he lived on a farm, and his owner would let him out every night, and he would patrol the whole farm and keep the sheep safe, and also his family, his little kids and everything. And he would take a circle and then lay on the porch, and then do another circle and lay on the porch. And on this particular night, 11 coyotes jumped the fence and were going to try to kill all the sheep and take them with them. And this dog they saw a video that he just ran right into the middle of these coyotes, and he wound up killing 8 of them, and he chased the other 3 off. And his owner couldn't find him for 3 days, and finally found him. He was holed up somewhere trying to heal up because he was very injured through this whole ordeal. And his owner said when he found him, his dog was wagging his tail like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I did not come back. I wasn't in position." But he wound up being okay. But yet another example of the loyalty he had to his family and to his job, that he was able to take on all these elements and survive. So I Googled loyal dog stories, and I got 20 different loyal dog stories. And just a little fun thing, I did not find a single loyal cat story in all my searches. So just you can hold that for whatever you want. I'm not a hater, but I'm just throwing it out there as a point of emphasis. Other areas where we can see loyalty, both in our lives and around us, in friendships. I delivered a sermon when we lived in Colorado once on the topic of friendship. And there was a man there that had previously been an elder, but had, due to his inability to connect with people, he was a brilliant guy, but he was kind of gruff, and he'd been asked to step down. And after my sermon, he walked up to me and he said, "Scott," he goes, "for 40 years, he goes, I've never given friendship any thought. I never put any value in it. But after listening to your sermon on it," he goes, "I'm going to change my ways." And you can see it in his life. I mean, he's completely turned around the way he deals with people and any interactions people have had with him. It's just changed friendship. His ability to recognize it and understand it has made him a much more loyal person and friend to people. If you think about jobs, we had a national sales meeting last week, and there were a couple of people that have been there in their company 40 years and 35. You have people, and this is not right or wrong, I'm just throwing out there that loyalty there's some benefits to being loyal. But there's some people that, they don't like what they're doing, or they get bored, or they want to keep moving on. And that's okay, I guess, but if you stay and if you work through your issues, if you keep getting better at your job, there's some value in loyalty, especially when it comes to your job. In marriage, there's value in loyalty. I was listening to a sports talk show host of all things. He's a believer, and somebody sent him in a question. He answers questions occasionally, and they said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to get married. Do I need a prenup?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to start my answer by telling you God hates divorce. And my mindset is that I entered a covenant with my wife. I didn't sign a contract with her." So to him, the loyalty of staying married superseded almost everything. And I thought it was a great lesson for him to share with a whole radio audience. But the loyalty, when you see marriages that have been around 50 years or 45, you can just imagine the things that they'd been through and worked through, and their willingness to stay together. And there's value in that loyalty. And God sees it, shows it as well. Sports fans, three examples real quick. The Red Sox and the Cubs in baseball. There were people that lived their whole entire lives and never saw those teams win a World Series. And the Lions just recently, they interviewed a guy, in football, I'm switching now to NFL, but the Detroit Lions, they just made the championship and the playoffs. And there was a guy crying because his dad had been a lifelong fan and been buried a few years ago in his Lions jacket and had never seen them win a playoff game. But just the loyalty that you can have as a fan, it speaks to the litmus test of what what loyalty can look like in our world. And the next section, if you look at motorcycles, Wayne likes motorcycles and I like motorcycles. I went to a show once and everyone had their bikes parked outside, and there was this really old bike and it had tape that was holding up what his GPS was, one of the old kind that was just a paper that you turned and it would tell you what turns to make. And that's how old this bike was. And you could tell how many miles he had on it. And somebody asked the guy, they said, "Why do you have that bike? Why don't you get a new one?" He goes, "That's my bike." And you could just see the loyalty that he had, and the loyalty that he got back from that bike. It had seen him through hundreds of thousands of miles. I've got coffee cups at home, and I was showing the kids. All the words have faded off the coffee mug. It's just red where it used to say, Western Kentucky University or whatever. And I'm loyal to those things, and because they're loyal to me, and it speaks to my mindset, I think. And I've got a pair of sandals that every time the buckle would break, I keep taking them back and getting them fixed. And finally, the lady that fixed them said, "Sir, it's time for you to get a new pair of sandals." She goes, "It's way cheaper for you to buy a new pair than me to keep fixing this." And obviously my answer was, "Go ahead and fix them. I like my sandals." So loyalty can show up in a lot of ways. I've got an ink pen that my brother gave me 25 years ago. It's always sat on my desk that whole time. He even rolled off my desk once and broke in half, and I super glued it back together. It's my ink pen. It's been loyal to me, and I'm loyal to it. So I hope you can see, as we get into looking at our spiritual lives, it's kind of a mindset into me, which might be good or bad, but also into what loyalty can look like for us, whether it's our jobs or marriage or being a fan. There's a lot of areas that loyalty shows up. But I want to look first at some positive biblical examples of loyalty. And all my slides are built the same way. The one I'm talking about will be highlighted in yellow, and then I've got verses associated with it. But the first one I'm looking at is Abraham from Hebrews chapter 11. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promise, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God had told him, "Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted." Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. We can look at Abraham, his loyalty to God. Even though he didn't always understand what God's ultimate purpose was, he trusted him enough to do what God wanted him to do. And obviously God was loyal to him, and he did not make him sacrifice Isaac. But to his point, Abraham's point, if he had of sacrificed Isaac, God would have either brought him back to life or found another way. So that's a good example of the commitment and the loyalty Abraham had to God. This next verse, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, and it really, whenever I think of loyalty, I think of Naomi and Ruth. It says, "But Ruth replied, 'Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me.' When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her." A couple points I want to bring out here. It wasn't in Naomi's best interest for Ruth to leave, because Ruth helped protect her and was a comfort to her. But But Naomi wanted what was best for Ruth. That's her loyalty to her. She loved her. She wanted what was best for her. And it would have been, in her mind, it would have been in Ruth's best interest to go back where her family was, to go back to her country where she could have remarried and had some protection. But Ruth's answer back spoke volumes. I'm not going anywhere. My loyalty is to you. And we can see how that act ultimately played out, and they were both better off for the loyalty that they had to each other. I always think about this verse. And we can look at Daniel. Daniel's loyalty, the whole book, honestly, but Daniel's loyalty to God was unwavering. He refused to compromise his faith by bowing down to idols or forsaking his prayer routine, even when facing persecution. King Nebuchadnezzar often got frustrated with him. He wanted him to be loyal to King Nebuchadnezzar, but that was never going to be Daniel's primary loyalty. It was to God. And we see that time and time again in what he did. When we look at Job, Job's loyalty to God was tested severely through suffering and loss. From chapter 13, verse 15, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Trust him, another version talks about. I will surely defend my ways to his face. God was loyal to Job and protected him ultimately, and Job's was truly loyal to God as well. He was willing to do what he needed to do, and he's willing to stand up for God. And Mary, mother of Jesus, and from Luke chapter 1, verse 38, I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. Her commitment to God was unwavering, and she took kind of a risk, and it didn't look like it was in her best interest. She carried Jesus. It was going to have been hard to explain to all your family and friends and your fiance what was going on here, but her commitment was to God, and ultimately we saw God's commitment was to her as well. And another point I wanted to bring out was, and we'll see that when we get to some negative examples, but the ramifications of positive loyalty is seen all around you. It just doesn't impact you, it impacts other people as well. And we'll see that again when we talk about negative examples. And finally, I want to look at the apostles. The early disciples of Jesus faced persecution, imprisonment, and martyrdom in their loyalty to Christ. They were able to put up with all of this, and they gladly did it. They boldly proclaimed the gospel even when threatened. And obviously, God was with them. We talked in class about how he spoke directly to Paul and said, I'm with you. I'll protect you. You go spread my word. Loyalty involves not only words, but also actions. And that's important for us to remember. It's one thing to tell people, hey, I'll be there for you. But it's another thing to truly be there for them when they really need you. And vice versa. It goes both ways. Loyalty does. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but negativity. Let's look at some negative examples from the Bible. And I promise you, I studied how to pronounce these first two words, and hopefully I did it right, but I might not have. We'll see. From 2 Timothy 1, verse 15. As you know, everyone from the province of Asia has deserted me, even Pelagius and Hermogenes. I knew I was going to mess those up. I almost took it out. But basically, Paul was saying that these two people, they were not loyal to him. They quit when he needed the most. And Paul was really big on loyalty. And we see other examples where people were not loyal to him as he expected them to be. When we look at Adam and Eve, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it as well. Her unloyalty and her wanting something different, the ramifications of that we still suffer from today. And it's good for us to remember that you can use your efforts for good or evil, and in this case, not being loyal had a profound impact not only on Adam and Eve, but also to everybody else. We look at Cain. from Genesis 4. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. Think about it. Cain could have reflected on what he had done wrong and changed the way he worshiped and changed his offering, and he would have been a much stronger believer at that time than he wound up being. So but instead of being unloyal, he could have been loyal. He could have taken to heart what God was trying to tell him, and he could have changed his ways. But ultimately, we see from verse 8, Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields. And when they were there in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Think of the impact on the whole family that this happened, and to those that follow. We still talk about it today. Unloyalty here had a profound impact. From Pharaoh, from Exodus 1, chapter 1 through 12. Pharaoh's refusal to release the Israelites from slavery, despite God's clear instruction, demonstrated his disloyalty to God, and also brought on his people 10 different plagues, all the pain and suffering, just because he was not loyal to God. It's another example. Achan, and this is one I thought Jordan might talk about in the future, but Achan's disobedience by taking forbidden spoils from Jericho led to defeat in battle. His disloyalty affected the entire community and ultimately led to his death. Israel in the wilderness, despite witnessing God's miracles, the Israelites repeatedly grumbled, rebelled, and doubted God's faithfulness during the wilderness journey. Think about us. Do we ever sink into grumbling, rebelling, or doubting God's faithfulness? And if we do, how does that reflect on those around us, or what impact does that have? Just kind of a cautionary tale for us from some people that should have known better. From Demas, from 2 Timothy 4, verses 9 and 10. Timothy, please come as soon as you can. Demas has deserted me because he loved the things of this life and has gone to Thessalonica. Sorry about that. Think about that. We can get distracted or let other things come between us and God. And this is an example where Demas let the love of things in this earth impact him in a negative way, and he lost out on his loyalty. Peter, we all know this story, but Jesus answered, die for me. I tell you the truth, Peter, before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me. I'm calling my shot here. Jesus said, you are going to be disloyal to me. And Peter swore, a curse on me if I am lying. I don't know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly Jesus' word flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times that you even knew me. And he went away weeping bitterly. Couple points that we can remember here. A, Peter made a mistake. But as we can see many examples later, he turned his life around, and he came back from this much stronger than he was before. And we can stumble occasionally in our loyalty, but we have to stay focused and remember what God's plan is and what our loyalty should look like. And we always have the ability to turn it around if we make a mistake. And finally, Jonah. The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go into the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord, kind of the ultimate in disloyalty. And what we can see is God's plan worked. He had to drag Jonah along through many things, and he grudgingly did it. But we can see how originally he was totally disloyal and got loyal enough but we can see the kind of the contradiction here between the two. And he's another example of biblical negative examples. So finally, I want to talk about 2 areas. One is God's loyalty. What does it look like? And I could have pulled 30 verses out, but I pulled 3 that I thought were apropos to what we're talking about today. From Deuteronomy 7:9. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is faithful God, keeping his covenant of a love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. But I talked about earlier, there's an action that we've got to have. God's love is always there for us, but we also have to love him and keep his commandments. And from Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 and 23, the faithful love of God never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh every morning. Think about that. I've always kidded that I'm kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch. Every morning I wake up and my mind's clear and I don't know what I'm going to do that day. But God's mercy and his grace are always there. Every day we wake up, it never leaves us. It's always there. And finally, from Psalms 119, your eternal word, O God, stands firm in heaven. Your faithfulness extends to every generation, as enduring as the earth you created. God's loyalty to us never ends, never wanes. It's consistent. It's always there. And we always have to keep that in mind. And it's a great comfort to us that our Christians, we know this. And we know that he's always there. And finally, what our loyalty should look like to God. Once again, I could have put 30 verses up here, but these are 3 that I think really speak to it. From Matthew 22, Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments. It's easy maybe to forget the second part of this, but we have to love the Lord our God. That's our first focus. Our first loyalty has to be to loving God. But then also, how do you treat your neighbor? How do you treat those you come in contact with, those around you? That's equally as important to God. And for us to be loyal to God, we have to do both of these things. And from Romans 8, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angel nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, or anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ our Lord. We can't let anything else come between us and God. God is a jealous God, but we have to remember our loyalty has to be to him first, and we can't let anything else come in the way of that. And then finally, from Luke chapter 12, I tell you the truth, everyone who acknowledges me, and this verse scares me almost more than any other one that I read, but it says, I tell you the truth, everyone who acknowledges me publicly here on earth, the Son of Man will also acknowledge in the presence of God's angels. But anyone who denies me here on earth will be denied before God's angels. Anyone who speaks against the Son of Man can be forgiven, but anyone who blasphemes the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. How would you like to be in the position where God says, I do not know you? When we need him most, he will be loyal to us as long as we are loyal to him. And as we've gone over this, what does loyalty look like? Remember that Jack Russell Terrier when you think about that. You can remember my sandals, whatever it takes for you to remember what loyalty, each one of us would have our own list probably of what loyalty looks like, but we can't ever forget what loyalty does look like. We've seen numerous biblical examples, and it's good to keep in mind that there's positive examples and negative examples. You can be disloyal, but more importantly, there's many ways to be loyal, and that's what we need to be. That's what we got to set out every day to do. God is loyal to us. We can't ever forget that. His consistency and his overreaching love for us, there's no ends to it. And the loyalty that God expects from us that we just talked about, we can't ever forget that. We have to love the Lord our God. We have to love our neighbors. We've got to keep all these things in mind as we go through life. So hopefully you'll walk away from this, and when you hear the word loyalty, or you see something on your desk or in your office, you'll think, oh, Scott, crazy Scott, I talked about that. He would consider that loyalty, but I still got this old cup. But it is. Loyalty is a good thing. And not that technology is bad or anything, but I've always regretted the things I sold far more than not buying something, if you can understand that. To me, there's value in loyalty. There's value in maybe fixing up an old car instead of just going out and buying something new just because you can. And so just keep these things in mind, and especially when it has to do with our spirituality and the relationship that we have for God. So I don't believe there's anybody here this morning, but if there's anybody here that has not been baptized for the remission of your sins, that, or if you need our help this morning, we're here to help you. We're a family. We study together. We pray together. We're here to help anybody that needs our help at this time. So if you need our help in any way, please come